In previous episodes, I began to cut and weld the chassis together. This was a particularly arduous job as I had to cut every single piece by hand and at complex angles. Now the axles were finished, the suspension was sorted, and the car sat on its own feet for the very first time. One of the first things I did to increase its power was to fit a carburetor from a 1998 Yamaha R1 motorbike. If the whole build can be considered a giant puzzle, the wiring was another massive puzzle by itself. I would have to completely build the car there and then disassemble it again in order to take it to the garage. Once in the garage, I went on to reassemble the car, but this time for good.
This is a story about the pursuit of a lifelong dream. To build my own car from scratch and drive it on the road. A dream that would be met with countless challenges, filled with massive highs and deep lows, encouraged only by the belief that someday I would be driving my own home-built car on the road. This would become my best account on how to approach life as a pursuit of your own interests and passions. Having learned at a very young age that nothing comes for free, that if you want something, you have to do it yourself. You have to get out of your comfort zone and get cracking. Pursue your passion, no matter what it takes. This is a 4-episode story on how I built my own car from scratch, proving that you can accomplish anything you set your mind upon. My name is Tom, and this is my story.
So finally the car was finished. Almost 9 years of blood, sweat and tears have passed, spending all my summers hacking away, and I must admit, the thought of giving up had crossed my mind several times. Whenever I just couldn't get something to fit or this part was taking way too long, I sometimes really thought, maybe I was too ambitious. But I always reverted to that dream I had that one day I would be driving the car on the road. This alone made me push on through the frustration, the countless burns, band-aids and cussing. Ever since the first day I started back in 2006, I dreamed day in and day out of this moment, when the car would finally be finished. And all this effort would boil down to a simple twist of the ignition key. Will it start or will it explode? Maybe I reassembled the engine wrong and a piston will fly out the moment I start it. Or maybe a wire shorts out somewhere near where the fuel is and all this effort would vanish away in a searing fireball. I was confident I had done everything right, but doubts loomed in my mind. After all, there are so many little things that can go wrong. So as a precaution, I couldn't start in the garage, just in case the fireball thing happened. And I didn't want to burn down all my neighbors' cars after all I put them through. So we pushed it out of the garage, far away from other cars or building property. So the battery went in, and I cranked it first without any fuel in order to prime the engine with oil. I filled the tank up with petrol for the first time, and it didn't leak. Thank God. Then I switched the ignition on. Everything was ready for the big moment I had waited for all these years. And then I twisted the key.
It's in gear.
I honestly could not believe it. I was certain something would not work, even if it was only a light bulb, but it all did. Even the electronic ECU worked perfectly and transmitted all the readings to the computer. Now, obviously the engine ran very rough as it needed to be adjusted, but I didn't care and I took it for a short spin. The next day, while enjoying a well-deserved hangover, I fine-tuned the ignition. I balanced the carburetors and set up the fuel mixture with an oxygen sensor. So this car is virtually a mixed bag of parts from many different cars. The radiator is from a Mark I Polo, the headlights are from a Citroen 2CV, the front indicators are from a motorbike, the steering rack is from an Escort, the horn is from a 5 Series BMW, The bottom ball joints are from an Alpha 164. The top ball joints are from a transit van. The washer bottle is from a Mark I Ford Fiesta. The ignition coil and ECU are from a Mark IV Ford Fiesta. The brake fluid reservoir is from an Alpha 147. The cabin blower right here is from a Fiat Tipo. The wiper mechanism is from an old Seat 127. The washer nozzle right here is from a Renault 5. The windscreen is from a Fiat Panda. The side mirrors are from a motorbike. And the rear lights are from an old Land Rover. This car is basically a Frankenstein of many car parts. Come to think of it, maybe I should call you Frank. Hello, Frank. So Frank was now ready for its next and final stage, getting him approved for use on the public road. This meant taking it through what's known as an individual vehicle approval in the United Kingdom. The process is complex, but it's made very straightforward thanks to the help that's available from the transport agencies, including a 300-page manual telling you in every single detail how you must build your car and fit all the components in the right places in order to meet the regulations. During the build, I always followed this manual, which illustrates in extraordinary detail what you must and mustn't do in order to comply with the regulations. From basic chassis design and construction, emissions, pedestrian and passenger safety, all the way to very specific things like the lights must be above and below a certain height from the ground and within a specific distance from the edges of the car, and they have to be visible from certain angles at a certain distance from the car. Properly fastidious stuff. So once all the paperwork was ready and an inspection was booked 2.5 months in advance due to how busy they were, all I needed to do was to take the car over to the UK. Now the easiest, most direct route was to take it up to Santander and catch a ferry that would take me straight to England, but that was way too expensive. Now the cheapest way would actually be to load Frank on a trailer and drive him all the way from Spain, passing through France, stopping at Bordeaux for the first night, then on to Calais, through the Eurotunnel and into England. Now I didn't have a big 4x4 or SUV to take Frank, so I decided to use the only car we had that was fit for the job, my mom's 21-year-old Mercedes. Remember that one I became so attached with as a kid? We still had this car after all these years, and it would prove to be a reliable companion in this 1,000-odd mile trip. I also borrowed a trailer from a friend of a friend that looked like it had just been fished out of the bottom of the sea. Nevertheless, it was free, so I took it. So I had my doubts on whether the old Merc or that tatty trailer would take the strain of such a trip. But nevertheless, we packed everything we needed, we hitched the trailer with Frank on it and set off. Just 10 miles into the trip, we had to stop. I had covered Frank with a tarp just in case it rained and to avoid drawing attention on the road. But it started flapping like crazy and the noise it made on the highway was simply unbearable. And that was just 20 minutes into the trip. I didn't want to imagine what 12 hours of continuous flapping would be like. So we stopped, took the tarp off and continued our journey. Frank was now traveling al fresco. Now it took me a long time to get used to two things. One was having to drive at 50 miles an hour, which is the speed limit in Europe for cars with a trailer, and also to give the old poor Mercedes a fighting chance to survive the trip. Going constantly at 50 miles an hour was something I wasn't used to. I was being overtaken even by lorries, and boy were we the entertainment for the day on the road. Almost every single vehicle that passed us had at least one person in it gawking in amazement, pointing at France saying like, what the hell is that? You know, some laughed, others honked their horn and gave us a thumbs up. It was brilliant. The other thing I had a hard time getting used to was having Frank stare at me through the rearview mirror the whole way. Every so often when I glanced at the rearview mirror to look at traffic, I got scared thinking I was tailgated by a massive angry buggy type of car. So mile after mile passed and the Mercedes was holding on. The temperature gauge was creeping up though, and it was consuming much more petrol than I thought. It was useless at overtaking with Frank on its shoulders, so I just switched the cruise control on and just relaxed. We'll get there. Much later than expected, but we'll get there. Hours later, we arrived at the French border.
Hey, we're through. Allez, enfants de la patrie, foie gras.
And as I feared, it started to rain heavily. Frank was getting drenched and we still had a long way to go towards Bordeaux. By that time, the sun had set and we were driving into the night. I still wasn't completely used to having Frank stare at me through the rearview mirror, but now at nighttime it was even worse. Because each time I pressed the brake pedal, the Merc's brake lights reflected on Frank's headlights and straight back into the cabin. It was like the red light district every single time I pressed the brake pedal. So we finally arrived at Bordeaux around midnight, parked the car, covered Frank, and set him for the night. The next morning, we stopped by a local hardware store to get something to cover Frank, or at least his cockpit. Given that all the instruments and electrics were exposed to the rain, I was worried they might break. So we bought a big roll of plastic and shitloads of duct tape, which, by the way, we didn't know how duct tape translated into French. So there we were at the hardware store making duck sounds and tape gestures to a baffled French man until he understood us. We were on the road again, 550 miles to Calais, our next stop. The Merc was holding up as well as it could. It now started consuming a bit more oil than usual, but she still went strong. One thing that makes road tripping through France special is that you never know what sequence of events will unfold to make your journey as unpredictable and painful as possible. Halfway through our journey, for example, the highway was suddenly closed for apparently no reason whatsoever, and we were taken on a detour right through the rural villages of central France, and 2 hours later we were back on the highway heading for Paris. Shortly afterwards, the traffic came to a sudden halt. We were greeted with a lorry driver strike that lasted for 20 odd miles. All of this cost us quite some fuel, and soon we learned another curious fact about driving through France, that motorway petrol stations, while awesome, can sometimes be closed without any warning whatsoever. I gazed on the fuel gauge to find that we were below reserve, and that was without knowing if that fuel gauge was properly working or not. We saw a sign saying the next petrol station was 20 miles away, so I began to apply all the hypermiling tricks in the book. Windows up, aircon off, radio off, feather the throttle to keep a constant speed and take advantage of downhills. We arrived at the petrol station only to find it was closed for no apparent reason. The next one was another 20 harrowing miles away. The Merc was literally running on fumes. I was waiting for it to sputter to a halt at any time on the hard shoulder of the highway, in the rain, in the middle of nowhere. Fortunately, we made it to the next petrol station. The Merc had less than a liter left in its tank. Straight away I went to buy a jerry can and filled it up just in case. I wouldn't go through this again. Finally we were approaching Paris. We could see the Eiffel Tower and the financial district in the horizon. The highway took us into the A86 tunnel that goes straight through under Paris. This is probably the lowest tunnel I've ever been in. I mean, the roof of the tunnel was literally like 6 feet above the car. 15 minutes later we emerged on the other side of Paris and all hell broke loose. The trailer started to snake about, pushing the Merc from side to side. A terrifying sound of grinding metal shortly followed. I looked through the rearview mirror to find that the left trailer wheel was seriously wobbling. It was about to fall off right there in the middle of the highway at over 50 miles per hour. Luckily, there was an exit right after the tunnel, and we managed to screech to a halt in a nearby shopping mall. Upon getting out of the car and inspecting the trailer wheel, all was evident. The axle bearing had literally disintegrated from the heat, and all that was holding the wheel on was the axle nut. Turns out my suspicions about the condition of the trailer were true. We were so lucky. Everything could have gone to waste had that wheel fallen off. Our journey so far, both cars, maybe even our lives. This could have also happened much earlier while driving through the middle of nowhere, and then we would have been in serious trouble. We started calling nearby repair shops, but they were already closed, quite predictably at 5 p.m. sharp. We had no other choice to call the tow truck. We were staying for the night at the outskirts of Paris. Luckily, there was a hotel right there with a garage I could keep Frank in. So 5 hours later, the tow truck finally waltzed by and took the trailer away. The next day we were greeted with a pleasant surprise of a tow truck driver strike, which meant absolutely no tow truck service in all of Paris for the day. We were literally stranded in Paris. There was nothing we could do. Not wanting this to spoil our mood though, we decided to go for an unscheduled outing to Paris. The next day, thankfully, the strike ended, but it also created a massive pile-up of orders due to that day off they had, so they wouldn't be able to return our trailer until later that evening. Finally, they took it to the repair shop we found nearby that could fix the trailer. By 8 PM, the trailer was fixed and we got the hell out of Paris, making a run for it to Calais. At midnight, we arrived at the Calais hotel, where we were greeted with a completely empty hotel. There was nobody there, lights off, only an ATM to give us our keys to the room. So the next morning at 8 AM, we got up and went straight to the boarding area at the Eurotunnel. Now, I'd seen what the Eurotunnel was like on some documentaries and TV shows before, but in real life, this was a whole different experience. The loading area looks like a scene from an apocalyptic sci-fi movie. This leads you to a bridge over the trains and onto a pre-designated ramp where you finally drive into a massive steel box. Riding inside that train with both the Merc and the trailer with Frank on it was absolutely epic. In less than 30 minutes, we arrived at Folkestone, England, and set off for our final leg of the trip. A pit stop halfway on the M25 for fuel and a full English breakfast was in order. Just 10 miles before we reached our destination, the trailer put up another fight. This time, we start to feel an annoying vibration, very similar to that when you drive a car with a flat tire. I looked on my rearview mirror and the trailer wheel seemed okay. We stopped to check, only to find the trouble now was with the tires of the trailer. Apparently the owner of that trailer cheaped out big time and put very low quality tires that weren't rated for the weight of the trailer and Frank combined. Again, we were stranded on the side of the road, frantically googling a tire shop nearby to help us. We found one just a mile away in the next highway exit. Apparently trailer tires are quite rare, and the size we needed were even rarer. So they told us they needed to order new tires and they would arrive 2 days later. Luckily, I had brought the spare tire for emergencies in the boot of the Merc, just in case. So they agreed to mount that one free of charge until the new ones arrived. We were so pleased with the brilliant service, and when they found out where we came from and what we went through, they were very supportive. So we finally arrived at our destination just before nightfall and settled into the hotel for the night. The next day was going to be the big day. In the next episode, I was sweating bullets over every single thing the inspector checked. He started by checking Frank from underneath. He wiggled every cable, tube, fitting there was. Then he began measuring things and checking distances and tolerances. My heart was skipping beats at that stage. There were so many things I could fail on, many of which needed a partial or complete rebuild of some part of the car if they failed. So he ran his thumb over almost every crevice of the car. In some areas he started tutting and shaking his head. I thought to myself, there it is, I failed. So he handed me the final report with 3 failing points. I had to find a way to fix that car that evening in the hotel parking lot with what I could find in the local stores and what I had brought along in the toolbox, and pray that a slot would be available the next morning at the station to retest the car and hopefully pass. There we were, back again at the testing station next morning at 9 AM sharp. He went straight to test the 3 things we failed initially. By the look on his face, I knew we had passed the test. The tester handed me the approval certificate and congratulated us. This for me was like receiving a birth certificate. Finally, Frank existed for real now, and he had his own official paperwork. And it was now legal to drive him on the road.